And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas, gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's July the 21st, 202nd day of this year. Just 163 days remaining to the year's over with, and we'll go do it again. It's National Lamington Day, Legal Drinking Age Day, Take a Monkey to Lunch Day, especially you folks who live in Washington, D.C. Plenty of monkeys in Congress. National Be Somebody Day, Invite an Alien to Live with You Day. The left, of course, would never do that, though they want the rest of us to. All right, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. Well, body cam has caught Sunny Hostin, who's one of the hosts on The View, invoking her legal chops as police cite the Harvard grad son for trespassing. She repeatedly reminded police she was a former federal prosecutor after officers stopped her Harvard-educated son for trespassing on Metro North Railroad property. As newly released body camera footage captured a TV host urging officers to cut him a break. She said, "My name is Sunny Hostin, and I'm one of the co-hosts on The View." The former federal prosecutor told an officer over the phone in body cam video obtained by Fox News. She said, "That's my son. He's a Harvard grad, doesn't have a criminal record, not a kid who's ever in trouble. It's an innocent mistake." According to records obtained by Fox News, Gabriel Hostin was stopped by Metropolitan Transportation Authority police short before 8 p.m. June 16th after officers observed him on the Metro North Railroad right away at New Rochelle Station. Police said he was trespassing in an area marked with no trespassing signs. An MTA police spokesperson told Fox News the 23-year-old was observed running near an electrified third rail before officers stopped him near Commerce Drive, conducted a criminal background check, and escorted him from the area. Because he didn't have a criminal history and cooperated with officers, police said he was issued a summons for trespass and released. Body cam video showed Gabriel Hostin asking officers whether issuing the summons was necessary. And, of course, they said it was. They have to justify their paychecks, don't you know? Well, Darlene Graham focuses on kitchen table issues as she announces a full-term Senate bid. Senator Darlene Graham, Republican of South Carolina, the sister of Senator Lindsey Graham, the late Senator Lindsey Graham, outlined her political priorities in an exclusive interview with Hannity on Monday as she announced she had to run for a full Senate term in November. She said, "He's worked so hard for so long, I just can't let that die. I've got to step in and carry on his legacy," she said in her first interview since Lindsey's death. "I know he cared about the people of South Carolina so deeply. He worked so hard for them. I feel like I can do that too. He taught me well," she added. After being appointed by South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster last week to serve out the rest of her late brother's Senate term until January 2027, Graham announced Monday she would run for a full 6-year term. Graham, South Carolina's first female U.S. Senator, told Fox News she feels an inner peace about succeeding her brother in representing the Palmetto State. She said, "It's a tremendous amount of pressure. I feel like I can do it. I feel inner peace about it." Well, Graham, who said that unlike Lindsey, who was passionate about ending the Russian-Ukraine conflict, she plans to focus primarily on domestic issues rather than foreign policy, place greater emphasis on the day-to-day concerns of South Carolinians. Well, one cannabis mistake at an airport could bring 10 years in prison and a $15,000 fine. Waiting overseas, American travelers are warned to double-check their bags for one item that could lead to hefty fines or even prison time. U.S. officials are reminding travelers that bringing cannabis products across international borders remains illegal in many countries. following a new customs policy in Thailand that significantly increased penalties for violators. In June of 2026, Thailand introduced tougher penalties for travelers caught bringing cannabis across its borders. Violators can face up to 10 years in prison, fine them up to 500,000 Thai baht. That's about $15,000, or both, according to the U.S. Embassy and Consulate in Thailand. Fox News reached out to Civil Aviation Authority of Thailand for comment. And also, Thailand decriminalized cannabis possession in 2022. Importing or exporting cannabis without the proper permissions is still illegal, according to the warning. Well, if you've got to risk everything to get high, maybe a little time in the Gray Bar Hotel will give you something to think about. Well, according to Morning Glory, America's winning its battle with Iran. It's only a matter of time. In the 4 months and 3 weeks since combat began in Iran, the U.S. has lost 17 or 18 of its warriors, where 3 or 4 were killed over last weekend, with more than 420 others wounded. 60 Israelis have been killed, and more than 100 Iraqis have died as a result of the conflict. Our allies in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates have all suffered civilian deaths, and every country in the region has taken a significant damage to its infrastructure. Iran has suffered military deaths in the thousands, with many hundreds of civilians killed as well. The toll on that country's infrastructure is massive, exponentially larger than that which it has inflicted on its neighbors in the region, with the highest estimates in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Iran's conventional military has been shattered. Its missiles and drone forces have been significantly damaged or expended. And it's far from being out of ordnance, though, with which to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz or its neighbors. It's avoided striking Israel during the most recent 10 days of combat as it fears a response of the Israeli Defense Force. That's deterrence restored, don't you know? The Iranian Revolutionary Guard is afraid to strike the Jewish state, and now it has to be made afraid to shoot at Americans or its Arab neighbors international shipping. The country's been pretty much devastated, but it still can't get it through its head. It needs to stand down. Top media networks put on notice after refusing to air Trump's primetime address. That's raised serious concerns. Representative Buddy Carter, Republican of Georgia's action the Federal Communications Commission to review ABC, NBC, and CBS broadcast decisions after the networks either declined to air live or cut away from President Trump's July 16th primetime address. In a letter first obtained by Fox and sent Monday, Carter asked FCC Chairman Brendan Carr to review whether the networks violated their obligation to serve the public interest, whether their actions ought to be considered in future broadcast license proceedings. Public airwaves should inform the American people, not be used by corporate executive to decide which matters of national importance are permitted to hear, according to what Carter wrote. He also raised serious concerns in the letter, saying networks can disagree with President Trump's remarks while still airing what he says. He said broadcasters may criticize, analyze, or fact-check the president's statements, but refusing to air a major presidential address because executives disagree with its content raises serious concerns that they intended to keep Americans in the dark about potential foreign interference with our elections. Well, part of the problem is that the executives of those networks are, in fact, leftist, and they don't like President Trump. So, as far as they're concerned, they're going to ignore him. Hope he goes away. Well, it doesn't work that way, as I hope they're getting ready to find out. Well, Nicaragua's Ortega says the country will never again hold elections, shutting out opposition. Nicaraguan leader Daniel Ortega said the Central American country would no longer hold elections, further closing off any potential path for the opposition to challenge the government he leads with his wife, Rosario Murillo. Ortega, Nicaragua's longest-serving leader, has remained in power since 2007 and previously governing during the 1980s. His current presidential term is scheduled to run through 2027. But he said there won't be any more elections for them to try to seize the government and seize power. He delivered those remarks on Sunday during a speech commemorating the 1979 Sandinista Revolution, in which Ortega participated in the overthrow of the U.S.-backed dictatorship of Anastasio Somoza. So I guess he's made himself dictator for life. We'll see how long that lasts. Well, Obama is warning that Vance is pushing a blood and soil version of We the People mantra. Former President Barack Obama suggested Thursday that Vice President Vance is pushing a blood and soil vision for the country despite being married to the daughter of an immigrant. Vice President came up as Obama was discussing the Reconstruction era with author Malcolm Gladwell, claiming that the issues from that era are still being discussed today. He said it's impossible to spend a lot of time thinking about Reconstruction without reflecting on the present day, Obama said, because the issues, well, they're still there. Somebody's asking why it's relevant to talk about Reconstruction. I have to describe to them the degree to which we're having that same argument. The issues of how we're going to help the free people who've been enslaved. What are we going to give them to allow them to have a go at life? What does real freedom mean? Well, that coming from a man who tried to remake everything in his own image when he got elected president. We'll see how that comes out. Johnson's strategy to bypass Democratic SAVE Act blockade survives a key vote, gives the GOP a big win. Speaker Mike Johnson's latest bid to skirt Democrats' opposition to an election integrity bill backed by President Trump survived a key hurdle on Monday. Safeguarding American voter eligibility America Act, or Save America Act, has faced significant headwinds in Congress despite having Trump's full-throated support. While it passed the House, the legislation struggled in the Senate, where at least several Democrat votes are needed to break a filibuster and advance to a final passage. But the new plan by Johnson, Republican Louisiana, which would allow key parts of the bill to skirt Democrats entirely, one step closer to getting a House-wide vote sometime this week. Republicans would erase the need for any Democratic buy-in by putting key elements of the Save America Act into a larger budget reconciliation bill. Reconciliation process allows the party in power to pass sweeping fiscal policy reforms without input from their opposition by lowering the Senate's threshold for passage to line up with the House simple majority requirement. We'll see if, in fact, that bill does get passed. It would be a benefit to the country, but Democrats don't seem to have much need of doing that. President Trump weighs Iran war expansion as fresh U.S. strikes target Hormuz shipping threats. U.S. Central Command said a ninth straight wave of strikes on military targets in Iran was completed on Sunday night. President Trump paid tribute to the U.S. service members killed in recent attacks linked to Iran, saying American forces launched another round of strikes in honor of them. 2 U.S. service members in Jordan were killed last week during an Iranian-linked attack, U.S. Central Command said. A third U.S. troop was killed in Iraq on Saturday. Iran's lead negotiator, Mohammad Baghir Ghalibaf, said that the recent U.S. military deployments in the Middle East showed Washington was not serious about de-escalating tensions with Tehran. U.S. forces launched a fresh wave of strikes against Iran at President Trump's direction, escalating the military campaign in the region. The Houthis announced a maritime ban on Saudi Arabia, saying it was a retaliation for what they called the kingdom's blockade of Yemen in a recent attack on the Sana'a International Airport. U.S. forces launched a fresh wave of strikes against Iran at President Trump's direction, escalating the military campaign in the region. An explosive-laden drone was shot down near Al Harir Air Base in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdistan region. That's according to security sources. President Trump's expected to decide in the coming days whether to expand military operations against Iran and return to the full-scale combat. Iran's UN ambassador, Amir Saeed Irvani, demanded UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the Security Council condemn what he said was a U.S. attack at the Darkhoven nuclear power plant. Well, Iran doesn't have many allies anymore. They've gone after everybody they can think of. President Trump weighs Iran war expansion as fresh U.S. strikes hit Hormuz shipping threats. He's talking about a regime change in Iran. We'll see if he goes through with that. And Lil Langley suffers a wardrobe malfunction while opening for Morgan Wallen in Baltimore. And Lil Langley isn't stuck in the past or worried about tomorrow after suffering a wardrobe malfunction on stage. The Be Here singer kept her cool after her entire dress became unzipped just minutes into her opening set for Morgan Wallen on his Still the Problem tour over the weekend. Langley, who's 27, handled a mishap with ease and slipped into a Baltimore Ravens jersey before picking up a guitar and carrying on with the show at M&T Bank Stadium. The choosing Texas singer was dressed to impress as she took the stage wearing her signature sparkling pink gown covered in fringe. And in videos circulating online, she eagerly covered up in the purple football jersey as rain poured down on the stage. She addressed the incident with her social media followers on Sunday. Well, she said, yes, my entire dress came unzipped on song number 2 in a 60-minute set on the pouring down rain in a stadium full of people. Well, accidents happen. Well, President Trump's GOP clout faces Arizona test with the House majority, governor's race at stake. President Trump's immense clout over the GOP and the power of his endorsements in Republican-nominated races face their test today. As Arizona holds primary elections, his endorsements in a handful of key races, including in a top swing congressional district, could impact the midterm battles for the House majority to control the government offices. He's backing Representative Andy Biggs, a former House Freedom Caucus chairman, for the GOP gubernatorial nomination and a chance to challenge Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs in November. Biggs, who's also backed by the political wing of the conservative powerhouse Turning Point USA, is considered the front-runner in a race that includes longtime Republican Representative David Swigert. Also on the ballot are concrete pumping contractor Scott Neely, who's making his second run for governor, and business owner Ken Michelli. Well, Arizona is, what happens there is hard to predict. President Trump says his first call with the new UK Prime Minister Burnham went very well, pledges U.S. support. Yesterday, he said he spoke with Britain's new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, shortly after he took office. President Trump added he and Burnham plan to meet in the not-too-distant future to discuss issues of mutual interest. During the call, the leaders touched on the long-standing U.S.-UK relationship and the challenges facing Burnham and began his time in office. President Trump pledged U.S. support. He said, we discussed many subjects, including the outstanding relationship we've had with the U.K. We'll see what comes of that. Well, Prince William and Kate Middleton finally feel free to show affection in public, according to the experts. They are increasingly affectionate in public appearances, and that's caught royal watchers' attention, with experts saying the couple are entering a happier, more relaxed chapter after a difficult few years. On William and Middleton's official Instagram account, the couple shared a photo of themselves embracing in a deep hug after completing the National Three Peaks Challenge for the Royal Marsden Cancer Society. During the challenge, Middleton hiked the 3 tallest mountains in Scotland, England, and Wales, which raised money for the charity which directly supports the Royal Marsden, the hospital she received her cancer treatment from. And then they posted a photo showing them embracing and kissing and doing all the usual things that couples do. Well, this next story is a bit, shall we say, unusual. An illegal immigrant who murdered a Michigan woman is suing the president. He's demanding $75 million, a public apology, and U.S. citizenship because he said his feelings got hurt. He's serving a lengthy prison sentence for the murder of a Michigan woman. He's alleging he faced humiliation when the case was used as a political talking point. He wants $75 million, a public apology, and a U.S. citizenship, as he said. His name is Brandon Ortiz Vita, 27, is previously deported from the U.S., serving a sentence of 39 to 102 years in prison for killing Ruby Garcia in March of 2024. Garcia's body had several gunshot wounds and was found dumped along a road in Grand Rapids. The pair were in a romantic relationship and were engaged in an argument at the time of the killing. But he says his feelings are worth $75 million. ESPN is parting ways with NFL analyst Ryan Clark ahead of the network's first Super Bowl broadcast. ESPN is parting ways with Clark, according to multiple sources. Clark's expected to be part of a round of layoffs the network could announce as soon as Tuesday. NFL analysts are being among the highest paid on-air personalities ESPN cuts, according to sources. He gets about $2 million a year to give his opinion about football. It's unclear whether Clark's contract is expiring or whether he's being sidelined with time remaining on his deal. Clark joined ESPN after retiring from the NFL in 2015 and is re-signed with the network in 2021 for 3 years. 2024, the two sides had contentious contract negotiations, and Clark posted on social media at the time he felt he deserved more, and ESPN disagreed. Ultimately, they did agree to a deal. So he's worth more than $2 million. Okay. I know people do his job for a whole lot less than that. It's an interesting story just came to light. Miami's cost of living is now topping New York City's, despite Florida's tax advantages. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Beach cost of living is 5% higher than New York City metro area. And I can tell you from our time living there, everything was unusually expensive. And this was years ago. Well, the financial math behind fleeing high-tax states for a Florida paradise is hitting a major roadblock. While the absence of a state income tax in the Sunshine State remains a powerful draw for transplants, the combination of rising property taxes, soaring property insurance premiums, and everyday inflation has pushed Miami's total cost of living above New York City's for the very first time. Recent Bloomberg analysis found that the data from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis indicate that the combined cost of living in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Beach region, dubbed the Gold Coast, is 5% higher than that of New York metropolitan area and its surrounding suburbs. Additionally, consumer prices in South Florida have risen 36% since 2019, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. That represents the second highest inflation surge among major American markets. It trails only Tampa. Well, let's see. Sydney Sweeney shares bikini and underwear photos in an Instagram dump from an Australia trip. Her latest photo dump includes up-close and personal shots of her bikini top and casually brushing her teeth in her underwear. Yes, we all stand and wait for things like that to be shown on the internet. Over the weekend, the SYRN founder uploaded 20 images to Instagram from her latest trip to Australia, where she's filming Netflix's live-action Gundam movie, a little Aussie dump, she called it. While brushing her teeth, she snapped a photo of herself in a gray cardigan, buttoned halfway down, wore a pair of her SYRN underwear, which were blue with white lace. Well, on that note, let us go see what story we have for today. We talked about some strange topics. We got another odd topic. See, our government is indulged in a lot of, well, let's call them experiments that they haven't told anybody about. And this next one's called Project Shad, the secret shipboard chemical and biological tests that were undertaken. Took place on the USS Power. Now, the sailors knew that the North Atlantic could be a hard place on a ship. In the winter waters off Newfoundland, wind could cut through a man's coat, salt spray could freeze against steel, and the deck could become a slick, dangerous skin of ice. But in 1965, the men aboard that destroyer were facing something stronger than weather. Small monitoring civilian technicians were all over the ship. Small monitoring stations appeared on board. After days at sea, the men took throat and gargle samples from the crew. Questions were rushed aside. They were told to go about their business, nothing to see here. Decades later, radio man George Brocklebank sat before the U.S. Senate, described what it felt like to finally understand what had happened. Said he had known the ship was being sprayed with bacteria, zinc, cadmium sulfide, or decontamination agents. After an investigative journalist showed him film from the test, he said he felt disgusted and betrayed by the Navy. And he gave the sentence that cut through all the official language. When you take throat swabs and saliva samples from sailors, that makes you a test subject. Well, the program was called Project Shad, S-H-A-D, short for Shipboard Hazard and Defense. Officially, Shad wasn't supposed to be a human experiment. It was a Cold War vulnerability test. Department of Defense wanted to know how American warships could hold up if an enemy attacked them with chemical or biological weapons. Could a cloud of aerosolized agent slip through ventilation systems? Would mass protect the crew? Could washdown systems remove contamination from a ship's outer surface? Could a vessel keep fighting after being struck by invisible weapons? And the ship was the target of the experiment. But the problem was the ship was full of sailors. Project Shad was the sea-based side of the larger Department of Defense program known as Project 112, planned and conducted from the early 1960s to the 1970s by the Deseret Test Center at Fort Douglas, Utah. The VA now states that Project 112 and Shad consisted of both land-based and sea-based chemical and biological warfare vulnerability tests at different locations. The land tests studied how agents behaved in different climates and terrain. Shipboard tests studied the vulnerability of U.S. warships and procedures for responding to chemical and biological attacks. The Cold War setting matters. In 1962, American defense officials feared that the Soviet Union and China were developing chemical and biological warfare capabilities. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara had ordered a broad review of military readiness, and Project 112 emerged as one of the roughly 150 classified projects. That program was managed through the Deseret Test Center, which is funded and staffed by all branches of the armed services. According to the National Academies, 134 classified tests were planned under Project 112. 50 were completed and 84 were canceled. All the completed tests, 21 involved naval vessels and were later designated the Shad test. Well, that sounds very technical until the names of the agents appeared. The VA says the wider Project 112 or Shad program used a range of substances. It included biological warfare agents such as Coxella burnetii, Francisella tularensis, and Staphylococcal enterotoxin B, along with nerve agents including sarin and VX and tabun and soman. Some tests use active agents, others use simulants, tracers, and decontaminants. The word simulant made some of it sound harmless, but that word could hide a serious uncertainty. These substances were chosen because they behaved like deadlier agents in the air, water, or skin, or on steel. They were meant to imitate war. At sea, the tests were given names that sounded almost playful. Eager Bell, Autumn Gold, Flower Drum, Shady Grove, Copperhead, Big Tom, Fearless Johnny, Purple Sage, Scarlet Sage, Half Note, Folded Arrow, Speckled Start. But behind those names are real ships and real crews and real clouds involving material moving across real decks. In Copperhead, for example, conducted in early 1965 off Newfoundland, USS Power was used to test aerosol penetration in an operational ship under frigid marine conditions. That test involved Bacillus lobigi, zinc cadmium sulfide tracer particles, and beta porphyrilactone. And HILO, ships off San Diego, were used to study how a cloud of sarin simulant might penetrate different types of naval vessels. In Flower Drum 1, the USS George Eastman was involved in tests using sarin, methyl acetate, and sulfur dioxide to assess vapor penetration and protective measures. And then there was the test known as Shady Grove. Retired Navy Lieutenant Commander Jack Alderson testified in 1964 he was ordered into the Project Shad technical staff aboard the USS Granville S. Hall at Pearl Harbor. He commanded a division of 5 Navy light tugs crewed by Navy sailors. One tug, the LT-2080, a dissemination capability, was nicknamed Pepe Le Pew by the sailors with gallows humor. Alderson said the purpose of the tugs was to test biological weapons at sea, and remembered test names including Shady Grove and Fearless Johnny and Big Tom. National Academy's test table describes Shady Grove as involving Army tugs, Marine aircraft, and agents or simulants including Coaxial Bernetti, Bastarella tolonesis, Bacillus lobigi, and zinc cadmium sulfide tracer. Stated purpose was to determine ineffectivity, viability of atmospheric diffusion, and weapon system capability. Alderson testified that during Shady Grove, test subjects were placed in cages topside at night, and crews went into the Citadel. A Marine A-4 aircraft flew over, one spreading the toxic agent and another spreading trace elements. At morning light, a 3-man exterior decontamination crew went topside to retrieve the exposed subjects, samplers, and equipment. He said the scene was hard to shake. A small tug in the Pacific darkness, men sealed inside, animals in cages above them, aircraft coming in low over the water, an invisible cloud passing across the deck, and sailors waiting below till mid-morning. Alderson's testimony wasn't simple anti-military anger. He said safety precautions were taken inside the knowledge and technology available at the time. Remained proud of the professionalism and patriotism of his crew, and that nuance made his warning more powerful. His concern wasn't just what happened during the test, but what secrecy did afterward. He told senators the security classifications under which they worked kept the exposure out of health records. Some records were even missing. Men who trusted the Navy said might not know their health problems could be related to Shad, and their doctors would not know what to look for. I've been dealing with the VA for over 40 years. I've seen records, my own records, vanish inexplicably. I've been told I'm just a complaining old fart who ought to just go away and leave the real government employees to do their jobs. But at the end of the day, the question becomes, while serving this country, what did I incur? What was I exposed to? Well, there's still a lot of questions about that to be answered. But in programs like this, secrecy becomes the second exposure. The chemical cloud passes once. The classified file can poison a life for decades. The men have been ordered to silence. Health.mil's current Project 112 Shad document page still lists a 2011 memorandum titled Release from Secrecy Oaths under Chemical and Biological Weapons Human Subject Research Programs. The fact that such a memorandum had to exist in the first place tells its own story. Men had spent years believing they couldn't fully discuss what they'd seen, breathed, handled, cleaned, or endured, even when their health declined and their doctors asked questions. The Department of Defense later argued that Shad personnel were test conductors, not experimental subjects. Some veterans rejected that distinction. Robert Bates, who served aboard ships involved in Shad tests, told the Senate that the government's first fact sheets said crews wore protective clothing, but his ship's crew didn't. He said some crew members had throat and nasal swabs taken after the test. And he stated directly that the government had tested sailors as guinea pigs in chemical and biological tests. George Brocklebank described the same moral divide from another angle. He said civilians wore overalls and masks while servicing monitoring stations, but he was never given any protective gear. When Senator Bill Nelson asked whether he had been told anything before, during, or after the test, Brocklebank said, "We were completely in the dark." He said he didn't hear anything for more than 30 years, and the official and human versions of Shad are not easily reconciled. National Academies later wrote that Shad's intent was to evaluate ships, protective systems, dissemination equipment, and the behavior of agents in marine environments, not to assess health impacts. But the same report acknowledged that exposure samples such as gargle samples or chemical dosimeters were obtained from men present during some tests. It also stated plainly that the active chemical and biological agents used in Shad were potential weapons known to be debilitating or fatal in the short term to unprotected personnel. So there's a central question that remains. When a ship's deliberately exposed to a chemical or biological attack simulation and the men on board that ship, where does equipment testing and end and human exposure begin? Well, that answer actually stayed buried for years. The existence of Project Shad didn't become widely known to the public till decades after the tests were over with. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, veterans and journalists and members of Congress and veterans organizations forced the subject into the open. VA records show in 2000, at VA's request, the Department of Defense began declassifying and sharing information about possible exposure to warfare agents and the people involved. You know, one of the interesting things I encountered, I was stationed in the Panama Canal Zone, and that's where Agent Orange was taken prior to being sent to Vietnam, and was stored in bunkers. And at one point, we were given a job of cleaning out those bunkers. And the barrels in which the Agent Orange was stored were actually rusty. Some of them even had holes in them. And that's when I discovered, after I got to know some of the officials of Pan Canal Company, that the clouds of, I called it smoke, that rolled through the quarters in the evening were actually Agent Orange extracts being used to combat mosquitoes. And the kids would be out there playing in those clouds of smoke. And of course, the air conditioners in the quarters pulled it out right inside. So during the night, we were all exposed to Agent Orange. But your area has to be declared an area of Agent Orange use for the VA to pay any attention to you. And while documents did circulate that talked about it, the powers that be, in order not to look bad, of course, discounted all that. Well, Health.mil notes that classified Shad information wasn't completely cataloged or located at one facility, and that the Deseret Test Center actually closed down in the 70s. Searching for documents after 40 years meant digging through records kept by different military services in different locations. This wasn't a neat archive waiting to be opened. It was a scattered memory of classified war planning. Congress got angry, of course. In June of 2002, Senator Bill Nelson of Florida stood on the Senate floor and said he'd learned disturbing news about servicemen being used as human guinea pigs. At that point, he said only a fraction of the tests had been released, and only 622 of thousands of sailors had been notified. He wanted to know who'd been exposed, what substances were used, and whether civilians were affected and what medical care was owed. Well, in my own case, the VA says, show us proof, show us records, or go away. We wish you old folks are off the rolls anyway. A few months later, in a Senate hearing, Vietnam Veterans of America argued that Project 112 and Shad information had to be immediately declassified as to exposed personnel, agents, and dosage levels. The group called for exposed veterans to be notified, examined, and placed in a national registry. And their accusations were severe. They said information being withheld from veterans and Congress and the public and even senior VA leadership. The Government Accountability Office, which I found to be a joke, later found the notification effort remained incomplete. The 2008 report, GAO, stated the DOD had identified 5,842 service members and an estimated 350 civilians potentially exposed during Project Shad. But it stopped actively searching for more Project 112 participants in 2003 without a sound and documented basis. GAO also reported that non-DOD sources, including the Institute of Medicine, later identified about 600 individual additional names. The report warned that some identified veterans and civilians remain unaware of possible exposure unless the process improved. Well, that funding was one of the most important pieces of proof in the Shad files. The scandal was not only the test actually happened. It was that after the truth began to emerge, the government still struggled to identify and notify everybody who might have been exposed. And one of the reasons they said they couldn't do it, funding. They had plenty of funding to expose people, but not enough funding to notify them. The health question became painfully complicated. Some veterans reported cancers, respiratory problems, heart disease, miscarriages in their families, strange illnesses, and a sense that their bodies had become evidence of something the government would not fully admit. Brocklebank testified he and shipmates had health problems, and his wife had 3 miscarriages early in their marriage, and no one from the government had contacted him for almost 40 years about Copperhead. He said, I guess they just wanted to wait until they were all dead and the problem would disappear. Well, I've had some of that same philosophy given to me by the VA. Younger employees who never served and felt that having to follow up after veterans was beneath them. But the scientific record wouldn't allow every illness to be cleanly traced back to Shad. The 2016 National Academy Shad 2 study compared 5,868 Shad participants with 6,753 similar veterans. It found no overall statistically significant difference in mortality or morbidity between Shad veterans and the comparison group. Excuse me. The committee also noted that previous studies have produced complex results, including earlier indications of poorer self-reported health among Shad veterans and a VA study that found increased all-cause mortality driven mainly by heart disease. Same National Academy's report also made clear that uncertainty remained. The committee said its negative findings couldn't unequivocally rule out some potential effect from Shad testing, especially given the limits of available data. It lacked individual dose estimates, complete information about where each crew member was during the test, and full access to some classified sampling data. In other words, science couldn't confirm the veterans' worst fears, but neither could it fully reconstruct what each man had actually breathed, touched, swallowed, or carried home. And that's the cruel space where many Shad veterans lived. Not proven, not disproven, not forgotten, but never fully answered. The VA today says veterans who participated in Project 112 or Shad from 1962 to 1974 and have a health condition believed to be caused by the testing may be eligible for disability compensation. VA also says it's committed to reaching every living veteran involved based on rosters developed with DOD and informing them of available services. That's the official present-day response. But it came after years of denial, classification, incomplete records, scattered files, congressional pressure, and dying witnesses. Project Shad belongs in the forbidden and hidden files of the world because it sits at the intersection of national defense and human trust. The Cold War fear was real. Chemical and biological warfare tests were real. And chemical and biological warfare threats were also real. Military had a legitimate need to understand how ships might survive invisible attacks. The legitimate fear doesn't erase the duty to tell the men involved inside the experiment what they were facing. Navy ships were not empty steel by any means. They had radio men, signal men, engineers, cooks, officers, young sailors who trusted orders, trusted their country, trusted if something dangerous had been done to them, somebody would tell them. For decades, many were not told. Most haunting image of Project Shad is not a mushroom cloud or a battlefield or a laboratory full of glass vials. It's a warship at sea, buttoned up under orders while a cloud moves over the deck. Some men know more than others. Some wear masks and overalls. Some sit below, waiting. Instruments collect samples. Civilians come aboard, throats are swabbed, records are filed away, the ship returns to port, and sailors go on with their lives. Then 30 years pass before the truth begins to come out. That's the hidden file of Project Shad. The government said it was testing ships, but the men aboard those ships spent the rest of their lives asking whether they'd been part of the test all along and didn't know it. Well, from Project Shad, let's turn to something that actually made the headlines across this country back in 1916. I'm talking about the Black Tom explosion. It happened at 2:08 in the morning, New York City Harbor. It was Sunday, July 30th, 1916, and most of Manhattan was asleep. Across the water on a small industrial island off Jersey City, boxcars and barges sat packed with ammunition, artillery shells, dynamite, and explosives waiting to be shipped to Britain and France. America was still officially neutral in the First World War, but its factories and ports were feeding the Allied war machine. To Germany, those docks were not neutral, of course. They were arteries, and Black Tom Island was one of the veins. Well, the first fires appeared quietly, almost harmlessly in the dark. Then the harbor erupted. 2 million pounds of war material detonated at the Black Tom Railroad Yard in what's now part of Liberty State Park. That blast shattered thousands of windows across Lower Manhattan and Jersey City. Shrapnel tore into the Statue of Liberty. The explosion killed at least 4 people, according to the FBI summary, 3 men and a baby, though some later accounts suggest the real number may have been higher because poor people and workers living in nearby barges may never have been fully counted. The city woke up as if the world had ended. In Manhattan, people were thrown from their beds, glass fell into bedrooms, hotel lobbies, offices, and streets. Across the harbor, Ellis Island shook so violently the immigrants and staff had to be evacuated. On Bedloe's Island, where the Statue of Liberty stood with their torch still glowing, soldiers, women, and children scrambled toward shelter in their nightclothes while debris rained down for hours. National Park Service records that the second largest explosion came about 2:05 in the morning, sending shells and bullets and glass and wood across the island and damaged 17 buildings. Statue of Liberty herself was wounded. Shockwave showed the statue's torch arm against the crown, damaged its internal framework, shrapnel embedded in the side of the statue facing Black Tom. 4-inch thick iron door at Fort Wood was ripped from its hinges and pushed inward as if by a giant hand, according to the National Park Service. Torch had once been open to visitors who would climb inside the arm, and after Black Tom, that access was closed, and it's remained closed ever since, interestingly enough. Captain Peter Rosetta, who was aboard a barge in the harbor, and later told the New York Times that when the explosion came, it seemed to fall from above, like a Zeppelin bomb. Remember nearby vessels and a tug disappearing into the chaos? Lower Manhattan's Woolworth building. In that building, watchmen reportedly dropped to their knees and prayed. On Ellis Island, telephone operator Owen Fitzpatrick said the shock threw him from his chair while glass fell over him in showers. At first, nobody wanted to believe what had actually happened. The early explanation leaned toward accident, carelessness, smudge pots, unsafe storage, and bad luck. And of course, that was understandable on the surface. Black Tom was a disaster waiting for a spark. Nearly 70 railroad freight cars were holding munitions, and Johnson barge number 17 carried about 100,000 pounds of dynamite. Firefighters couldn't even fight the blaze properly because bullets and shells were flying through the air. But the truth was much darker. The Black Tom explosion was an act of sabotage carried out by German agents trying to stop American munitions from reaching Germany's enemies. The U.S. had not yet entered the war, but German intelligence was already operating on American soil. The FBI now describes Black Tom plainly as a German sabotage attack. National Park Service is just as direct. The munitions depot was deliberately sabotaged to prevent supplies from reaching Britain and France. What makes Black Tom so important is not only the size of the explosion, it's the fact that Americans lived through a foreign attack in the heart of New York Harbor, and for many years, most folks didn't know it. Well, the sabotage network behind Black Tom was part of a wider German campaign. German operatives targeted ships and factories and rail lines, munition depots, while America tried to maintain neutrality. The FBI noted that the U.S. had few national security laws and no mature intelligence system prepared to stop such operations. The Bureau of Investigation, the FBI's predecessor, had only about 260 employees and limited jurisdiction. Most effective early investigators are often New York City Police Department bomb squad detectives. One of the most infamous tools of that shadow war was the pencil bomb, a small incendiary device designed to start fires after a delay. Smithsonian Magazine describes these as cigar-sized devices containing acids separated by copper chambers. When the acids finally ate through the copper and mixed, they created intense flames. Properly placed, they could ignite cargo days later after the ship had already left port. At Black Tom, investigators later focused on men connected to German sabotage circles, including Michael Kristoff, Lothar Witzke, and Kurt Janke. Kristoff, a Slovak immigrant living in Bayonne, was suspected of helping set incendiary devices. Janke and Witzke later linked to the operation as more evidence emerged. But in the immediate aftermath, the case was too murky, too politically sensitive, and too difficult to prove. That uncertainty protected the saboteurs. A month after the explosion, police arrested a suspect that had to let him go for lack of evidence. Publicly, the explosion was often treated as a tragic industrial disaster rather than an enemy attack. The Council on Foreign Relations notes that one early investigation even concluded the explosion couldn't be blamed on alien plotters. Of course, that statement was wrong, but the proof would take decades to appear. The long fight for accountability became almost as astonishing as the explosion itself. After World War I, insurance companies, lawyers, investigators, and government officials pursued Germany through the German-American Mixed Claims Commission. It took years of legal warfare to prove sabotage. In 1939, the commission finally ruled the German Empire had been responsible and ordered damages to be paid. But by that point in time, of course, Hitler's Germany had no intention of honoring that settlement. The settlement wasn't really reached till 1953, and the final payment didn't arrive until 1979. That means the last money connected to the Black Tom attack was paid more than 60 years after the harbor exploded. The damage was immense. Contemporary estimates placed property damage at about $20 million, almost unimaginable figure in 1916. Smithsonian notes that the blast was felt across a huge radius and later compared to an earthquake measuring up to 5.5 on the Richter scale. People heard or felt it as far away as Philadelphia. Windows broke across parts of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Jersey City, Hoboken, and Bayonne. But today, Black Tom is strangely absent from public memory. Millions of visitors go to the Statue of Liberty without knowing that her torch was closed because of a wartime sabotage attack. People walk through Liberty State Park without realizing they're near the site of one of the most destructive acts of foreign sabotage ever carried out on American soil. Island itself no longer appears as it did in 1916. Landfill projects eventually absorbed Black Tom into the New Jersey mainland. What remains is a plaque, a name, and a story too large to have been forgotten so easily. Black Tom belongs in the forbidden and hidden files of the world because it exposes a version of American history that feels almost erased. Before Pearl Harbor, before 9/11, before the modern language of Homeland Security, foreign agents actually slipped into New York Harbor and detonated enough explosives to shake the largest city in the country awake. The attack revealed how vulnerable the United States was before it built a serious domestic intelligence system. It helped expose the need for stronger espionage and sabotage laws. After America entered World War I, Congress passed the Espionage Act and later the Sabotage Act, expanding federal power to pursue enemy agents and wartime conspiracies. But the human image remained stronger than the legislation. A sleeping city was jolted into terror. Immigrants rushed off Ellis Island. Children on Bedloe's Island moved through the dark in bedclothes. Firefighters helpless beneath falling shells. A barge captain watching a harbor tear itself apart. Statue of Liberty still glowing while shrapnel struck her skin. And that's the strange cinematic horror of Black Tom. The explosion didn't happen on a foreign battlefield. It happened in the symbolic doorway of America, beside Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty, where millions had arrived believing they were entering a safer world. In the early morning hours of July 30th, 1916, that doorway was attacked from within the harbor itself. Did the people who carried it out ever get caught? Well, the jury's still out on that, but the evidence appears to say no. Well, this next story, we've got a couple of minutes left. I'll start into it. We'll finish it up tomorrow. This one began in the morning of November 29th, 1970. Father and his two young daughters are hiking in the cold hills outside Bergen, Norway, when they came upon something that didn't belong in the silence of Isdal. The valley already carried a grim reputation. Locals called it Death Valley, not because of legend alone, but because its steep, lonely terrain had been associated with suicides and fatal accidents. It was late November. The landscape could feel almost emptied of human warmth. Wet stone, thin trees, dark slopes, mountain air, and the gray stillness that settles over western Norway before winter fully takes command. And then the daughters smelled something. A few steps further, among rocks near a path below Mount Eureka, they saw the charred body of a woman lying on her back, her face and front badly burned. Her hands were drawn upward toward her body. Around were scattered objects that looked less like the belongings of a hiker and pieces of a stage scene. A burned umbrella, plastic water bottle, liquor bottle, rubber boots, a scarf, a woolen jumper, nylon stockings, and a purse. She became known as the Isdal woman. There was also a matchbox, jewelry, and traces of burned paper. Beneath or near the body, investigators later found a fur hat or traces of petrol. Every label, tag, or identifying mark that might have told the police who she was had been removed or else scratched away. There was no passport, no handbag full of letters, no driver's license, no family photos, no name. As I say, they became calling her the Isdal woman. A name was not an identity by any means. It was actually a placeholder, a location where her life should have been. When the Bergen police arrived, they opened case 134/70, one of the strangest investigations in Norwegian criminal history. At first, it seemed like it might be suicide. Isdal had that reputation. The body was burned. Sleeping pills would later be found in her system. Remote locations suggested somebody didn't want to be interrupted. But almost immediately, the details began to resist that simple explanation. She wasn't dressed for a mountain death. She seemed to have tried, or somebody had tried for her, to erase every trace of who she'd been. Even her belongings had been stripped of origin. Official post-mortem deepened the mystery instead of ending it. The autopsy at Gades Institute concluded she had died from a combination of phenobarbital poisoning and carbon monoxide poisoning from the fire. Soot was found in her lungs, meaning she was still alive when the flames burned around her. Her stomach and blood showed she had consumed a large number of Hudnall sleeping pills, commonly reported as being between 50 and 70 tablets, and more pills were found near the body. And her bruises on her neck, that could have come from a fall or from a blow. Her teeth and jaw were removed for evidence because of unusual dental work. Tissue samples are preserved. But one detail, soot in her lungs, has haunted that case for more than 50 years. A woman can take pills, a woman can light a fire, a woman can choose a remote place to die. But could a woman deeply drugged on barbiturates pour petrol on herself, remove or arrange personal items, ignite herself, breathe in smoke, and leave behind no clear identity, no farewell note, no obvious reason? Could she do all that alone? The police, while officially leaning toward suicide, there were, of course, a lot who didn't believe it. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about the mysterious death of Isdal. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.